In a seemingly peaceful community where people go about their daily lives under the shadow of unreasonable rules from the HOA, Nathan Daniels, a regular man, finds himself thrust into an unimaginable showdown with imposters posing as law enforcement. The story begins when Nathan, a man who has always followed the rules in his neighborhood, is suddenly confronted by a group of individuals claiming to be from the HOA enforcement unit, accusing him of trivial violations like his mailbox and lawn furniture. What seems like an absurd encounter quickly turns into a larger conspiracy about extortion and fraud disguised as community enforcement. What Nathan and his neighbors experience isn't just a confrontation with fake law enforcement. It's a fight to reclaim justice and expose the corrupt abuse of power within the HOA. The twists and turns in this story will keep you on the edge of your seat, with an explosive climax and the ultimate triumph of standing up for what's right. You won't want to miss the thrilling details in the next part of this story. Be sure to leave your thoughts and opinions about the story in the comments below. Let's talk about how power can be misused and how communities can stand up for their rights. If you're enjoying this thrilling narrative, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on more exciting stories to come. Join us in supporting a community where justice and truth are always upheld. Nathan Daniels was settling into his favorite recliner, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, and the TV remote nestled comfortably in his other. It was a peaceful morning, nothing out of the ordinary, just the way he liked it. But that tranquility was shattered when a loud and aggressive knock echoed through his front door. No one was expected, and certainly not with such force, as though someone were trying to break in. He set his coffee down and walked toward the door, not in a rush, assuming it was just another typical visit. But when he opened the door, what greeted him nearly made him laugh out loud. 3 men stood on his porch, dressed in mismatched uniforms that looked more like something from a costume store than actual law enforcement. They had the posture of a SWAT team about to raid a criminal hideout. The tallest of the trio, a middle-aged man sporting a thick mustache and mirrored sunglasses, stepped forward and flashed a shiny badge that looked more like a toy than anything official. "Sir," the mustached man said in a deep, authoritative voice, "we need you to step outside immediately." Nathan raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms over his chest. "And who might you be?" "We're with the HOA enforcement unit," the man declared, his 2 subordinates nodding seriously behind him. Nathan blinked in disbelief. "The HOA has an enforcement unit now?" he asked, his tone a mixture of curiosity and mockery. "We do," the mustached man replied, lifting his chin. "And we don't tolerate non-compliance." The absurdity of the situation almost made Nathan laugh out loud. He had heard about overzealous HOA regulations, but this was something else entirely. The man reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper, and dramatically unfolded it, reading aloud, "You have been cited for an unapproved mailbox design and unauthorized lawn furniture." Nathan looked at him, blinking in confusion, then glanced over at his perfectly ordinary black mailbox and 2 simple chairs on his porch. "My mailbox?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's wrong with it?" "It doesn't conform to the HOA's latest aesthetic guidelines," one of the lackeys chimed in, looking down at his clipboard as if reading from a script. "And my lawn furniture?" Nathan asked, motioning toward the chairs that had been sitting undisturbed on his porch. "It's unapproved," the mustached man stammered, looking down at his paper for any backup. Nathan fought back a smirk. "So let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You're trying to arrest me over a mailbox and some chairs?" "This isn't a joke," the mustached man snapped, stepping forward. "Non-compliance with HOA ordinances is a serious matter. You're coming with us." Nathan folded his arms. "And exactly where are you planning to take me?" "To our holding facility," the man replied with a puffed-up chest. At that, Nathan couldn't hold back his laughter. "You mean to tell me the HOA has a jail?" he asked incredulously. The mustached man's face turned red. "It's not a jail," he said through gritted teeth. "It's a compliance center." Nathan paused for a moment, rubbing his chin. "I see," he said, pretending to think it over. "Well, gentlemen, I hate to break it to you, but I'm a little busy today, so I'll have to decline your invitation." The mustached man's patience snapped. "That's it," he shouted. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Nathan didn't budge. Or what? He asked, unfazed. One of the lackeys stepped forward, pulling out a cheap pair of handcuffs that looked like they might break if a strong wind blew on them. Do it now, sir, or we'll be forced to take action. Nathan sighed and shook his head. All right, he said slowly, turning slightly. But instead of reaching for a weapon, he reached for the small radio clipped to his belt. With a quick press of a button, he sent out a silent distress signal to his deputies. All without breaking eye contact with the so-called officers. The mustached man grinned, clearly thinking he'd won. That's right, he said smugly. You're learning your place. Nathan didn't flinch. Oh, I know my place, he said quietly. Just as one of the lackeys stepped forward to slap on the flimsy cuffs, Nathan moved in a single swift motion. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and spun him toward the nearest car. The lackey yelped as his face smacked against the hood. The mustached man staggered back, eyes wide with shock. What the hell do you think you're doing? He yelled. Nathan glanced at him, still holding the struggling man in place. Performing a citizen's arrest, he said calmly. The second lackey froze, hand hovering over what was likely another fake citation book or a laminated sheet of nonsense. But before he could act, the sound of sirens grew louder, and real police vehicles skidded to a stop in Nathan's driveway. The three fake officers looked like deer caught in headlights. Nathan leaned in close to the man he had pinned to the hood of the car. Now, let's talk about who's really under arrest. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the street as two squad cars came to a screeching halt in Nathan's driveway. The mustached man and his lackey stood frozen, unable to move, as Deputy Ryan Brooks stepped out of one of the vehicles, hand resting casually on his duty belt. Boss, Ryan called, raising an eyebrow. Mind telling me why you're wrestling with a guy in what looks like a Halloween costume? Nathan finally released the man, stepping back and brushing his hands off. These three were in the middle of conducting an unlawful arrest, he said with a grin. Ryan looked at the trio, then back at Nathan. All right, let's see some IDs. The mustached man tried to regain his composure, but his fake authority couldn't hide for long. This was just the beginning. With the sound of sirens still echoing in the air, the scene had turned from an absurd encounter to a full-blown standoff. The fake officer stood frozen, completely caught off guard by the appearance of real law enforcement. Deputy Ryan Brooks, calm as ever, walked up to the group, his gaze shifting from Nathan to the three men in ridiculous uniforms. Ryan didn't waste any time. Let's see some IDs, he said, his tone matter of fact, as he motioned for the fake officers to hand over their credentials. The mustached man tried to steady himself, his chest puffing out again in a futile attempt to regain some sense of authority. He hesitated for a moment before pulling out a wallet and handing it to Ryan. But the badge inside was laughable, a cheap, poorly engraved piece of plastic that didn't belong anywhere near the law enforcement community. Ryan flipped the badge over, inspecting it closely. HOA compliance officer, huh? You gotta be kidding me, he muttered under his breath. Then he raised his eyes to meet the mustached man's. You're really trying to tell me that's an official badge? The man stammered, but Ryan wasn't having any of it. Which department issued this? Because I've never heard of an HOA compliance division running around like this. The mustached man faltered, glancing nervously at his lackeys. We were authorized by the HOA board to enforce neighborhood regulations, he said, voice wavering. Ryan didn't buy it for a second. He raised an eyebrow. Authorized? And where's the paperwork for that? I don't see anything here that checks out. You're not even registered as security guards, let alone authorized to be playing sheriff. The second lackey, a young man with shaggy hair and a nervous twitch, piped up, trying to salvage the situation. We were told to do this by the HOA. We've got jurisdiction over this whole neighborhood. Ryan gave him a skeptical look, then turned to Nathan. Did you sign off on any of this? Nathan shook his head, his eyes never leaving the fake officers. Not a chance, he said with a firm shake of his head. This is as bogus as it gets. Ryan exhaled slowly, clearly unimpressed. He flipped through the fake IDs, and with every passing second, the tension in the air grew thicker. He turned his gaze back to the mustached man, his voice calm but carrying a sharp edge. So, let me get this straight. You've been running around pretending to be law enforcement, Trying to arrest people for imaginary crimes, like their mailboxes and lawn chairs? That's your big plan? The mustached man's face turned red as he tried to come up with a defense. It's not like that. We're just enforcing compliance. People need to follow the rules. Nathan stepped forward, crossing his arms. Enforcing compliance? You're trying to arrest someone for having the wrong mailbox. That's not compliance enforcement. That's just petty harassment. Ryan nodded, a look of disgust on his face as he turned to the second lackey. So, how much were you charging people for these violations? He asked, his voice flat but with a noticeable edge of disbelief. The lackey shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to respond. He exchanged a nervous glance with the other two, but no one spoke. Nathan raised an eyebrow. No answers, huh? He glanced at Ryan, who shook his head in exasperation. Let's check their vehicle. Ryan didn't wait for confirmation. He walked over to the SUV that had been parked in front of Nathan's house, its bright HOA logo on the side. As he opened the door and rifled through the contents, he let out a low whistle. Well, what do we have here? He muttered, pulling out ticket books, fine notices, and, to his amusement, a small cash box. Nathan joined him, bending over to inspect the items. Looks like someone's been raking in more just HOA fines, he said dryly. This is starting to look like a scam, not a neighborhood enforcement. Ryan closed the door with a click, his expression grim as he turned back to face the fake officers. You know, we're not the ones who've been making threats today, but this sure looks like fraud to me. The mustached man, realizing his grip on the situation was slipping, attempted a last-ditch effort to get out of trouble. We were just following orders. We were told we could issue fines and take whatever we could collect. Nathan narrowed his eyes. Orders from who? The HOA board? The man hesitated, then finally muttered, Yes, the HOA board. We were promised a cut. Ryan's eyes widened as he glanced at Nathan. Looks like we're dealing with a bigger problem than a couple of fake cops, he said. He turned back to the lackeys. Fraud charges are just the beginning, fellas. If you've been threatening people or forcing them to pay up, things are going to get a whole lot worse. Nathan stepped forward again, his voice cold. You've been running a scam, trying to extort homeowners with fines that aren't even real, and you're going to pay for it. The lackeys fidgeted uncomfortably, clearly realizing how badly they'd miscalculated. They had been caught red-handed, and there was no way out. Ryan looked back at Nathan, his expression a mix of amusement and disbelief. You've been getting the short end of the stick here, but I have to admit, this is kind of impressive. Nathan let out a small chuckle. I wouldn't say impressive, just another day on the job. The group of fake officers was about to find out that their little operation was about to come crashing down, and Nathan wasn't about to let them walk away easily. The atmosphere grew heavy with anticipation as the real law enforcement officers closed in on the fake ones. The tension between the two sides was palpable, the standoff now fully escalating into a confrontation neither party could easily walk away from. Nathan, still standing tall and unwavering, glanced at Ryan, who was already preparing to take action. The moment of truth had arrived. All right, let's get to the bottom of this, Ryan said, his voice sharp and controlled. He took another step forward, keeping his eyes trained on the group of imposters. You're not fooling anyone anymore. We're going to figure out who's behind this mess. The mustached man, now visibly sweating, puffed up his chest once again in a desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling facade. He shifted on his feet nervously, trying to regain some control over the situation. You don't understand, he blurted out. We've been authorized by the HOA board. We have every right to enforce these rules. Nathan chuckled darkly, his arms still crossed, a look of amusement mixed with disbelief on his face. Every right? He scoffed. You're barely even qualified to stand here, let alone issue arrests. You're not cops, you're criminals playing dress-up. Ryan, unimpressed, shot a sharp look at the other two lackeys, who were doing their best to avoid eye contact. Do you guys really think that pulling off this pathetic impersonation is going to fool anyone? You've got fake badges, a truck full of fraud, and a paper trail that's about as solid as wet tissue paper. The mustached man's confidence faltered. His hands began to shake, and his voice wavered as he stammered. We were just following orders from the HOA board. They promised us a cut. We were told to enforce these rules, and if we didn't, we'd lose our position. Nathan raised an eyebrow, clearly unfazed by the fake officer's excuses. And you thought extorting your neighbors was a smart way to get a paycheck? He shook his head in disgust. You're about to learn the hard way that you don't get to pretend to be the law just because someone gave you a badge and a clipboard. Ryan was now fully focused on the trio. We've got enough evidence right here to put an end to this charade, he said, his tone cold but resolute. Not only are you impersonating law enforcement, but you're also committing fraud by collecting fake fines. You've broken more laws than I can count. The second lackey, the younger man with a nervous twitch, suddenly stepped forward. We didn't mean to hurt anyone, he muttered weakly, clearly cracking under the pressure. We were just doing what we were told. It's not like we knew it would go this far. Nathan's expression turned steely as he stepped toward the man. You knew exactly what you were doing. You didn't just send fake citations. You threatened people, forced them to pay money for nothing, and you probably ruined some of their lives in the process. The mustached man stepped forward, his hand raised in a futile attempt to regain some control over the situation. You can't just arrest us. We were doing our jobs. You have no right. Before he could finish, Ryan cut him off with a sharp command. Enough! You're under arrest for impersonating law enforcement, fraud, and extortion. You've broken enough laws to make sure you won't see daylight for a long time. The two lackeys froze. There was no denying the evidence. Ryan had just delivered the final blow, and there was no turning back now. The mustached man, desperate to escape, made one last attempt at running, but Nathan was quicker. With a swift move, he grabbed the man's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to the ground with a controlled but firm grip. Nice try, Nathan said with a chuckle, but you're not going anywhere. Ryan stepped forward, his handcuffs ready. I've got this one, he said to Nathan, his voice full of quiet determination. He expertly cuffed the mustached man, who was now trembling in shock at how quickly everything had unraveled. The second lackey, who had been looking around for an escape, dropped to his knees, surrendering with a defeated look in his eyes. Looks like the show's over, Ryan muttered, a satisfied smile creeping across his face as he cuffed the other lackey. You've played your last act as a so-called officer. It's over. But the situation wasn't over yet. Nathan's gaze shifted to the third and final lackey, the one who had been standing silently, his face pale with fear. The man seemed to realize that there was no way out. His eyes darted between Nathan and Ryan, searching for any escape, but none came. We didn't mean for it to get this far, the man said quietly, his voice trembling. We thought we were just helping out, just following orders. Nathan walked toward him, his tone low and unyielding. Well, you got yourself into a world of trouble by thinking you could get away with this. You didn't just break laws, you hurt people. You're not getting off the hook for that. Ryan stood by, his arms crossed as he watched the final lackey. You're going to have to answer for everything you've done. No excuses. With the three men now handcuffed and under control, Ryan gave Nathan a nod of approval. Good work. These guys thought they could get away with something they weren't prepared for. Looks like they're not so tough when they're on the other side of the law. Nathan smirked. Yeah, well, when you've been on the job long enough, you learn how to spot a fraud. These guys were amateurs from the start. The real police vehicles now fully surrounded the area, and more officers began arriving to assist in the investigation. As Nathan and Ryan prepared to load the fake officers into the back of a squad car, the once bustling neighborhood had quieted down, and the community members were beginning to gather around, eagerly watching the aftermath. One of the neighbors, an older woman, stepped forward and called out, "Sheriff, does this mean we get our money back? They charged us for fines we never should have paid." Nathan turned to her and gave her a reassuring nod. If you've got receipts, hold on to them. We'll be making sure you get every penny back, and then some. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices lifting in unison. Nathan and Ryan exchanged a glance, both of them silently acknowledging the victory they had just achieved. As the fake officers were loaded into the back of the squad car, their faces filled with disbelief and fear, Nathan felt a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just about arresting a few fake cops. It was about standing up for the community and making sure that no one could exploit others under the guise of authority. It was a small victory, but one that would resonate throughout the neighborhood for years to come. The real police vehicles were fully parked now, their sirens fading into the background as the scene began to settle. The three fake officers, now handcuffed and subdued, were being ushered toward the squad cars by Ryan and Nathan. The entire neighborhood had gathered to witness the drama unfold, the residents whispering to each other, some in disbelief, others in excitement. They had all been victims of the scheme. Some of them had paid thousands of dollars in fake fines for trivial violations, while others had been threatened with even more severe consequences. But now, justice was finally in their hands. As the fake officers were loaded into the back of the squad car, Nathan turned to Ryan, who was busy organizing the paperwork and ensuring everything was documented. The sound of the crowd murmured in the background, but Nathan's focus was on the bigger picture. They had only just begun to uncover the full extent of the scam, and it was much larger than they had initially realized. Ryan glanced up from his paperwork, his face serious. "You know this isn't just going to end with these three," he said quietly. "There's someone pulling the strings behind all of this, and I think we both know who that is." Nathan nodded grimly. "The HOA board. They've been running this show from the beginning. These guys were just the pawns in the game, but the real masterminds are sitting pretty in their offices right now, thinking they're untouchable." Before Nathan could respond, a neighbor stepped forward, holding a small stack of papers. It was an older man with glasses, his face lined with frustration and anger. "Sheriff Daniels, I've got receipts here for all the fines they charged me," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of relief and rage. "I paid them, against my will. These guys told me I'd lose my house if I didn't." Nathan took the papers from him, scanning them quickly. He looked at Ryan, his expression hardening. They were threatening people with foreclosures over lawn furniture and mailbox designs. That's not just extortion. That's an abuse of power. Ryan nodded. "We've got enough to make a case against these guys. But we need more than just the fake citations. We need to bring down the whole HOA board if we're going to end this for good." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he turned back toward the squad car, where the three fake officers were now seated, their faces ashen with fear. "Let's not waste time. We know where this leads. They're not the ones who need to be scared. They're the ones who are going to turn themselves in. The real criminals are the ones with the money and the power." As the squad cars pulled away, heading toward the local precinct, Nathan motioned for Ryan to follow him. The two of them walked back toward the HOA office, their steps quick and purposeful. Inside the HOA building, the mood had changed dramatically. The once confident board members now appeared rattled and anxious. The president, Alan Moore, a thin man with a nervous twitch in his eye, stood at the head of the room, trying his best to maintain an air of authority. But his suit, clearly too large for his frame, and the sweat now glistening on his forehead told a different story. He was no longer the unchallenged leader of the HOA. He was a man who was about to face the consequences of his greed. As Nathan and Ryan entered the room, the board members fell silent, their eyes darting nervously toward each other. Alan Moore took a deep breath and tried to force a smile. "Sheriff Daniels, Deputy Brooks," he said, his voice strained. "This is all a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding?" Nathan cut him off, his voice low and menacing. "You've been running a racket, extorting people for thousands of dollars, threatening them with foreclosure over nothing, and now you want to call it a misunderstanding?" Alan's eyes flicked toward the other board members, each of them trying to look unaffected, but the tension was obvious. The facade of professionalism was crumbling fast. We were just trying to keep the neighborhood in line. We had complaints, you know. People were not following the rules." "Complaints?" Nathan repeated, stepping closer. "People are forced to pay fake fines for not conforming to some arbitrary standards. You're not running a neighborhood, Moore. You're running a scam." Ryan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're all complicit in this. You signed off on this fraudulent activity. You knew what was going on, and you let it happen." Alan's face turned a sickly shade of pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. It was clear that he had underestimated how far Nathan and Ryan were willing to go to expose the truth. "We've got proof," Ryan continued, flipping through the papers they had collected. "And it's not just the fake citations. We've got financial records showing how the money from these fake fines was funneled into your pockets. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. This was organized fraud." The rest of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, no longer looking confident or self-assured. One by one, they realized the full extent of the situation, how their greed had put them at odds with the law. There was no escaping it now. Alan, realizing that the jig was up, slumped back in his chair. He let out a long sigh, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "You don't understand," he muttered. "We were just trying to keep things under control. People were upset about the lawns, the mailboxes. We thought we could make things better." "By scamming people?" Nathan asked, incredulity in his voice. "You thought extorting them would make things better?" Alan stared down at his hands, unable to meet Nathan's gaze. He knew that the game was over, that the consequences were unavoidable. Ryan's voice was firm as he spoke. "You've caused damage to this community, and you're going to pay for it. You're all going to answer for this." Alan slowly nodded, his face a mask of resignation. The weight of the situation had finally hit him. The fraud, the threats, the manipulation, it had all come crashing down. And now the board members who had thought they were untouchable would be facing serious legal consequences. Nathan turned to Ryan, his gaze resolute. "Let's get them booked. They're not walking away from this." As the board members were handcuffed and escorted out of the room, the neighborhood outside buzzed with energy, their voices rising in relief. Word had spread quickly. Justice was being served. Residents who had once been afraid to speak out now felt empowered. The truth had been exposed, and the criminals behind the fraud were finally being held accountable. Nathan took a deep breath and glanced around at the community, now united in victory. "This is what happens when people stand together and refuse to let corruption go unchecked," he said quietly to Ryan. "This is what happens when the truth comes out." Ryan grinned. "Yeah, and it's about time. You've got a whole neighborhood on your side now. They won't forget this." Nathan smiled, but the weight of the day's events still lingered. "Let's just make sure we keep it that way." As the last of the fraudulent HOA board members were led away in handcuffs, the community members began to gather, exchanging stories and celebrating the victory. For the first time in a long while, the people of this neighborhood felt safe, heard, and most importantly, empowered to stand up against those who would abuse their power. Nathan and Ryan had not only stopped a scam, they had restored justice. The neighborhood was buzzing with energy, the air thick with a mixture of disbelief and relief. People had gathered in small groups, sharing their stories, exchanging looks of surprise and joy as they realized that the nightmare that had haunted them for so long had finally come to an end. The oppressive weight of fear that had hovered over them for so long was beginning to lift. Nathan and Ryan stood by, watching the community slowly return to a sense of normalcy. But both knew this victory was more than just about catching a few fake cops. It was about restoring power to the people who had been silenced and bullied by a corrupt system. As Nathan glanced around, he could see the smiles on the faces of the neighbors, a newfound sense of hope in their eyes. A group of older women stood near the front of the crowd, talking excitedly about how they had been forced to pay exorbitant fines for the most ridiculous reasons. A man in a worn baseball cap told the story of how he had been threatened with foreclosure for a perfectly healthy lawn that didn't conform to the HOA's latest aesthetic standards. It was clear that this wasn't just about the fines they had paid or the fake citations they had received. It was about reclaiming their rights, their homes, and their dignity. One of the neighbors, an older gentleman in a faded golf cap, approached Nathan, his voice full of admiration. "Sheriff Daniels, I gotta say, you really turned things around here," he said, his voice warm and appreciative. "If you ever decide to run for office, you've got my vote. This whole town owes you one." Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "I think I'll stick to law enforcement for now," he replied with a grin. "But I appreciate it." Ryan walked up to join them, his eyes scanning the crowd. "It's not over yet, though," he said, giving a knowing look to Nathan. We still need to follow the money. Make sure the HOA board doesn't get away with this. There's still a lot of work to be done." Nathan nodded, his expression turning serious. "Yeah, but today we made a dent in their system. These people have been living in fear for too long, and now they know they're not alone." The older man who had spoken earlier, now holding a cold drink in his hand, raised a toast. "To the sheriff and his team," he called out, and soon the whole crowd joined in, their voices rising in unison. "To justice!" The cheers echoed through the neighborhood, and Nathan couldn't help but smile. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. A victory for the people who had been pushed to the brink and were now reclaiming their power. Ryan clapped Nathan on the back. "You know," he said with a grin, "this might just be the most peaceful I've ever seen this neighborhood." Nathan chuckled, looking around at the crowd. "Yeah, but I've got a feeling they'll be keeping a closer eye on the HOA from now on." As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the neighborhood, Nathan felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the arrests. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter how impossible it seemed. The truth had come out, and the people had been given back their power. The evening air was filled with laughter and the sound of people reconnecting, no longer burdened by the fear that had once held them captive. As Nathan and Ryan walked toward their patrol car ready to head back to the station, Nathan looked over at his deputy and smiled. "You did good today, Ryan. Real good." Ryan grinned. "Same to you, Nathan. Looks like you've earned yourself a place in this community's history books." Nathan gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "I'm just doing my job, but I'll take the credit for this one." As they drove off into the fading light, the last remnants of the day slipping away, the neighborhood began to settle down. The shadows of fear and uncertainty now replaced by a strong sense of community, trust, and resilience. The HOA board and their fraudulent enforcers may have thought they were untouchable, but they had underestimated the power of the people and the law that was there to protect them. Justice had been served, and for once it had been served in full. What do you think about this powerful story of justice being served? How do you feel about the residents' victory over the fraudulent HOA? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave your comments below and let's discuss. And if you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more thrilling tales like this. Join our community where justice, truth, and the fight for what's right are always at the forefront.